Um, Thank you very much for the invitation to come here and speak about beyond budgeting, not just a theory, but also a practical example of how to implement this from the company that I'm based in. I am based in the corporate finance unit in Statoil, so I'm a finance guy by education and background. But I've also spent some years working in HR, heading up an HR function, and that's actually relevant for what I will talk about today. I have also been in different leadership roles for more than 20 years, also relevant for what I will talk about today, because this is much broader than only budgets. There's a big doses of people and leadership into this. But just for the record, my first management job in Statoil back in 1984, that was as head of the corporate budget department. I have been heading up more budget processes in that role, in later finance manager roles, than I want to be reminded about. Looking back, I have done a lot of stupid things in my life, at least on the professional side. But as long as you can learn from that, I guess it's okay. And I think it also gives, hopefully, some credibility when I'm going to be quite critical to traditional management, including budgeting and the budgeting mindset. What I would like to share with you today is first a little bit about the problems that we were trying to solve. And I think it's important, if you want to change, that there's a common understanding of what kind of problems you are trying to solve. So that's where I want to start. I want to start off a little bit philosophical, and this is going to be more and more concrete as we move along. But we'll start out a bit up there. Then I've got a few slides on this thing called beyond budgeting. Beyond budgeting is actually a misleading name, because the purpose is not to get rid of budgets. The purpose is to create organizations which are more agile and more human, because we think that is good for and necessary for performance. And in order to do that, more agile, more human, we need to change traditional management. And in order to change traditional management, we also need to change the budgeting process and the budgeting mindset, because that sits at the core of traditional management. So that's where the name is coming from, but it is a bit misleading. This is much, much wider and broader than budgets. But we're going to spend most of the time talking about how we are trying to do this at Statoil. In our process, which we call ambition to action. And I'm saying trying, because although everything I will talk about is decided in Statoil, it's written into what we call the Statoil book, that doesn't mean that all of this has reached every head and every corner of Statoil. This takes time. It's actually quite painful for a number of managers, because this is so different from what these guys are used to. But decisions are made. We decided to kick out the traditional budget in 2005. We decided to kick out the calendar year in all the cases where it doesn't make sense in 2010. So this is not theory. This is practice. Statoil, I'm going to make the commercial quite short, but we are a Norwegian oil and gas company with significant international activities. Here are some data on the company. That turnover keeps moving after the oil price, of course. Right now, I think it's around 130 billion US. And on size measured by revenue, I think we rank around 40 on Fortune 500. But on these two metrics, we did pretty well in 2011. On social responsibility, we came out as #1, something that made us extremely proud, because it is very important for us. And on innovation, we also did pretty well, especially if you look at some other companies on that list. And of course, innovation here has a lot to do with technology, given the kind of company we are, oil and gas. But maybe there is an element of management innovation as well into this. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about today, management innovation. Because management needs innovation. Management, traditional management, I would argue, is an outdated technology that has been standing more or less still for the last 100 years. While we at the same time have had an enormous development and innovation within products and processes, technology and so on, the principles of management have more or less been standing still. So it's about time to get some innovation into that area as well. Another ranking that I don't have a slide on. Transparency International has listed Statoil as the world's most transparent listed company globally, which also made us proud because transparency is a key element in our model, both externally and internally. I think it is important that if we work in support functions in companies like maybe many of you do, and like I do, whether it's finance, IT, HR, or communications or whatever, I think it is important to remember that the only reason we exist is to help our organizations to perform as good as possible. And I think very often we think that as long as our stuff is running like a Swiss clockwork, it's kind of mission completed. But it's not, as long as that stuff doesn't help our organizations to perform to their full potential. It is as simple and as difficult as that. It is very much about, as we heard in the keynote, about enabling great performance to take place. And I would like us to reflect a bit on performance in a slightly different setting than business before we move back to business. I would like us to move into traffic. Because in traffic, we would also like to see good performance, right? Maybe some of you were probably, many of you probably were driving to the Hilton Hotel today. When we are in traffic, what kind of performance would we like to see? What would we like to experience? How would we define good performance in traffic? Anyone? Yes. No stops, right? A good flow. And of course a safe flow. So a safe and good flow is a definition of good performance in traffic, especially whether it's crossing traffic. And traffic authorities, they are also doing performance management in order to make that happen. And they have different stuff in their toolbox that we often see, especially when there is crossing traffic. And on my way from the airport yesterday, I saw several examples of those tools. And what do we often meet in a traffic crossing, which is there in order to create a safe and good flow of traffic? Traffic light, absolutely. So let's have a look at the traffic light. And let's ask two questions. Who is in control? Who is managing when the traffic light is used? And by the way, this is the good old-fashioned traffic light. There's no sensors or no high-tech, right? Who is managing? The clock? Well, okay, and who manages the clock? A computer, and who programmed that computer? Right? So, I mean, somebody programmed that thing, right? So, those in control are those who programmed this traffic light. And which information would they use in order to program this traffic light?
Intuition.
Yeah, and I hope that's a part of it, but maybe a bit more. Yeah, expectations about future traffic flows and maybe some historical trends, right? But again, as you are sitting there waiting for that green light, would that be entirely fresh information? No, for obvious reasons. That's a bit difficult, right? So, in short, I mean, those managing are not in the situation, because as you are sitting there waiting for that green light, where would that programmer be? As far as I know, there's nobody sitting inside that pole. I never checked, but I don't think so. Right. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe in his office programming the next light. Right? So not in the situation, and the information the programming is based on is not entirely fresh. Okay, so this was one of the things I saw on my way from the airport. But I also saw something else, an alternative to the traffic light. The roundabout, absolutely. So let's have a look at the roundabout and ask the same two questions here. Who is in control? You, right, we, us, drivers in the situation. Based on which information? Current traffic, what we see here and now, real-time information. So we get quite different answers on the two same questions. So it might be interesting to compare these two ways of managing. So let's do that. First of all, which of these two ways of managing traffic is normally most efficient? Not always, normally. The roundabout? Okay, I heard somebody say lights, but I heard more people say roundabouts. So, and personally, I think that normally the roundabout is more efficient. And by the way, this is a metaphor, right? We are not going to dive too deep into how to manage traffic here. But why is the roundabout more efficient? Because you have access to real-time information, absolutely. But here also, you have access to real-time information. You can see what is happening in that as you're waiting for the green light. So there has to be something else that is also in place in the roundabout. You manage your own flow in the sense that in the roundabout, you don't only have access to fresh information, but you have the authority to act on that information, right? You don't have that in the traffic light because then somebody else has decided. So that's probably the reason why the roundabout is more efficient. I would argue that there is one more thing that needs to be in place on top of fresh information and the authority to act. I'll come back to that in a minute. Another question, which of these two is most difficult to drive in? The roundabout, absolutely. And I would argue that everything we are trying to leave behind in Statoil in terms of traditional management is from a leadership point of view in a way much easier than what we are trying to do instead. But our guiding star cannot be to go for what is easy because it's easy. We have to go for what is good for performance. And very often, what is good for performance is somewhat more challenging from a leadership point of view. That doesn't mean that we are not trying to simplify. We think our new model is simpler, but simple is not the same as easy. Right? It has been said that simplification is the kind of ultimate sophistication. Another question, is it relevant to talk about values in this setting of traffic? We often talk about values-based management versus rules-based management. The traffic light is one simple big rule. Red, in case you don't know, red is stop, and green is drive, and then we can also discuss, we can always discuss yellow. But it's a very simple rules-based system. And if there is a value set among drivers waiting for that green light of me first, I don't care about the rest, it's normally not a big problem in front of that light. But it can be a very big problem in the roundabout. Because in the roundabout, we are much more dependent on everybody having this common purpose of wanting this to flow well. Here we have to be more considerate. We have to try to interpret intentions of others. We have to make our own intentions visible in order to make this flow. So I would argue that in order for a roundabout to be more efficient, yes, on top of the information and the authority, you need a positive values set. Is this relevant for what we will talk about in a minute when we move back to business? I think so. What you see on the right-hand side here, I think is a good example of what we just heard in the keynote about enabling performance versus managing performance. In the traffic lights, traffic authorities are definitely managing performance quite actively. But I would argue that what they do in the roundabout is more about enabling performance, creating conditions so that good performance can take place. But after that, it's actually a bit hands-off. And I think that is a mindset that we need to carry with us if we work in support functions, that it's about creating conditions for great performance to take place. I actually think our ability to manage performance in the narrow mechanical way that a lot of performance management stuff want us to believe, I don't think that's possible. I think our ability to manage performance in that way actually is quite limited. But there's a lot of things we can do when it comes to enabling performance, creating conditions for great performance to take place. And what you see here on the right-hand side is a more self-regulating way of managing, a more self-regulating management model. And I would argue that that is what we need in today's realities, if we want to take reality seriously. And the realities I'm talking about is first the world out there, our business environment, which is turbulent, dynamic, unpredictable, much less plannable than it was when I started my budgeting and planning career back in the early 80s. If we really take that uncertainty, the dynamics seriously, it has significant implications on how we design our management models. So that's one reality we need to take seriously. The other reality we need to take seriously is not external, it's internal, and it has to do with people. It has to do with people in the organization, and it has to do with asking ourselves, what kind of people do we think we have in the organization? And there are many languages and labels you can use to describe what kind of people you have. We chose to go back to good old Douglas McGregor, who wrote a great book back in 1960 called The Human Side of Enterprise. And he introduced something called Theory X and Theory Y. It has nothing to do with Generation X and Y, that came much later. Theory X. That's the negative view on people. That's the view on people that most people in an organization is a bunch of potential thieves and crooks, that all must be managed tightly and kept on short leashes, because if not, we know what will happen. They will all run away, do a lot of stupid things, and spend money like drunken sailors. Well, that's the popular version of Theory X. I think McGregor, he was a bit more polite and academic, but I think that's what he meant. Then you have Theory Y, a very opposite view on people. A view that most people in an organization, beyond being well-educated, competent, is actually responsible, mature people who want to do a good job, who want to contribute, who want to perform, who want to be involved, who want to be listened to, who want to be treated as adults. And again, it makes a big, big difference for your, or should make a big difference on your management models, whether you believe in mainly in Theory Y or mainly in Theory X. So those are the two realities we need to take seriously. And they both kind of drive us towards more self-regulating management models. If we combine these two triggers, the world out there, people in the organization, then it might look like this. You recognize the two dimensions, and I would argue that traditional management lies down in that left-hand corner and seems to have the assumption that the world is still a stable, quiet, plannable place, and that most people is on the X side. A few more reflections on X and Y before we move on here. Every time I talk about X and Y, there are some faces flashing in front of my eyes. And that is people in Statoil that I know, that I actually would put on the left-hand side. I think you need to keep a close eye on them. We do believe in Statoil that the majority of people are on this side. But we are not naive, and we do have people on the left-hand side. They exist in any organization. That's not the issue. The issue is, do we think they constitute a minority or a majority? Because if we think these guys are a minority, we cannot let these guys drive the design of our management models. Then we need to start with our majority view, and then we need to find other ways of dealing with these guys. It's just like in a free society. We are not putting everybody in jail because someone someday will do something wrong. Right? We are all free citizens within certain boundaries. Now, I'll come back to in a minute what I mean with traditional management, but if we think that the world is dynamic and most people is here, we can't be in that corner. We need to get up in that upper right-hand corner, and then we need to address both leadership and management processes. It has implications in both dimensions. And what do I mean with traditional management? I don't want to offend anyone here, but I'm going to make things a bit black and white. I hope you don't disagree too much, but I would argue that traditional management is something that's very rigid, it's very detailed, it's very annual. It's very rules-based, there's a micromanagement, centralized command and control. There's a lot of secrecy, and there's a strong belief in sticks and carrots as ways to drive and motivate performance. There might have been a time when this was the right place to be. There could still be places where this is the right place to be. But for us in Statoil, that is a completely uninteresting discussion. Because again, we believe that the majority of our people are here, and that we know we operate in a dynamic business environment. So in order to get out of that, we need to address both dimensions, both processes and leadership. On the leadership side, we need to be more values-based than rules-based. That does not mean no rules. Of course, we need operating procedures in the kind of business we are in, at our offshore platforms and refineries and so on. But in general, the more values-based you are, the less rules you need. We need more autonomy so that teams can respond fast in a dynamic world where there isn't always time to run 9 floors up to get that decision. We need more transparency for several reasons. One reason is, of course, learning. How can we learn from each other if everything is secret? But there is another important reason for more transparency, which is good news for those who are concerned by leaving this safe and comfortable corner because they are afraid of losing control. And that is the main kind of concern I hear around beyond budgeting. We are afraid of losing control. Here is some good news. Transparency is a great social control mechanism. There is a reason why thieves and crooks operate at night, right? Because then it's dark, there's no transparency. Here is a story from a Swiss pharmaceutical company called Roche. They are quite traditionally managed, but recently they did a very interesting experiment in an area that we all can relate to, namely travel cost. Within travel cost, they kicked out the travel budget, they kicked out most of the travel rules and regulations. What they introduced instead in this pilot was full transparency. So with a few exceptions, everybody could see everything. If you traveled, to where, and if you were flying, eating, sleeping, cheap or expensive. Everything visible for your colleagues to see and vice versa. And then they started out. What do you think happened with travel cost in the pilot versus travel cost in the rest of the company? Came down. Through a very simple self-regulating control mechanism, instead of adding more pages to the rules book, they were tearing out pages in the rules book. I'll come back to transparency later. It's a very powerful control mechanism. Last but not least, we need to get hold of that internal or intrinsic motivation in people like this that can move mountains if you really get hold of it. And I would argue that a lot of the stuff practiced in companies falls in the camp of sticks and carrots and hardly reaches that internal motivation. And I'll leave it for yourself to reflect on where individual bonuses falls between these two categories. I have a view on that, but we don't have enough time for me to argue or explain why I have lost my faith in individual bonuses. So that's a different story. In Statoil, we have always been quite a values-oriented, people-oriented company since we started out in the early 70s. So our challenge was that we had management processes which had a different message. And it doesn't help to have theory Y leadership visions if you have theory X management processes, because that creates gaps between what we say and what we do, and those kind of gaps are poison in organizations. Because we can write nice words in our books, but if our management processes has a different message, they are worth nothing. So our job was very much about aligning our management processes to what we said in our leadership principles. And there's a lot of stuff we have done on the management process side. I'll show you a few examples here. I'll come back to more afterwards. But I would argue that in this kind of dynamic world, with these kind of people on board, we need a different way of setting or thinking about targets. We need less of what I often call 29.2 targets. Well, the target is 29.2, anything above is good, anything below is bad, end of story. That kind of performance language is too narrow, too mechanical, not intelligent enough in these kind of realities. There has to be room for something more. There has to be room for instance, values. How did we achieve those results? There has to be room for hindsight insights, all the things we know afterwards that we didn't know up front. Was the tail with headwind that kind of helped us or made it difficult? Changes in assumptions. And also, we call this a holistic performance evaluation. And we also think that we should think more relative, because kind of comparing, defining good performance as how we are doing versus others compared to did we hit 29.2. Then we also need more dynamics into our processes. We need to do our stuff, whether it's target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, or all the other things done in management. We need to do this on rhythms that reflects the rhythm of the business. And I'm saying the rhythms of the business, because that is seldom only one rhythm. And if you think about it, January to December is an artificial construct from a business point of view. Not from an accounting point of view, not from a tax point of view, but that's not the stuff we are talking about here. So we need to organize this on more event-driven, natural rhythms. And this is actually what Beyond Budgeting is about, moving up in that right-hand corner by addressing both leadership and management processes. For some companies, the leadership journey is the longest. For others, the management process journey is the longest. For some, both journeys are equally long. But I would argue that if you want a full benefit of this, you need to address both dimensions. Some people struggle a bit with this. It's kind of okay to do something on the management process side, but values and theory X and Y and kind of, well, that's, especially for finance people, that's a bit difficult, right? There are benefits to be gained by only making this journey, this vertical journey. But if you want the full potential, you also need to take this journey. So this is what we are trying to do in Statoil. And again, I'm saying trying, because this is hard, it takes time. This is not a straight line from A to B. This is real change is hard, real change is messy. Real change is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then you have a detour, and then you stumble, and it is hard. But we are moving in that direction. We have almost no discussions about going back. We have a lot of discussions about how we can do this even better. And we are not alone in trying to move up in that right-hand corner. A number of other companies are on this journey in some form or shape. And here are some of those companies. On the left on this slide, you will find some Norwegian companies. Some of them actually quite big. In the middle here, some other European companies, and you will recognize our friends in Øssur, right up here, just started. On the right-hand side, some US companies, but also a great case from Brazil, Semco, and an interesting case from Malaysia, Telecom Malaysia. But the veteran here is this bank that you see on the top, Handelsbanken. It's a Swedish bank that operates across Europe today, and Handelsbanken is a pioneer within Beyond Budgeting because they completely abandoned traditional budgeting already back in 1970. Not as a goal in itself, but one of the things they had to do in order to become more agile, more human, and to perform better. And they have been sticking to the same way of managing, a very different way of managing from most other banks for more than 40 years. So it becomes relevant to ask the question we should ask, namely, is this good for performance? Does it work? Because if it isn't good for performance, we shouldn't do it. Well, this bank has been performing better than the average of its competitors every single year since 1972. Just calculate the probability of that being a coincidence. This bank is among the most cost-effective universal banks in Europe without cost budgets. And this bank has never needed a bailout from the authorities. Never. So it can't be, there has to be a link between the performance they consistently are showing and the way they are managing themselves. Handelsbanken was a pioneer very early, along with a few other companies here. This company, by the way, also an early mover, Mainfreight, New Zealand company from New Zealand. But it was first in the mid-90s that things started to happen. Then there were 2 English guys that got interested. They saw that something is happening among some companies here. They are kind of challenging traditional management. And they interviewed many of these companies. The name were Jeremy Hope, Robin Fraser. And they found a number of similarities between what these companies were doing. But it wasn't identical, because this was not, at that time, there were no books written, the name Beyond Budgeting didn't exist. This was more like a grassroots rebellion, call it a revolution from people like us. Right? At that time, mid-90s, the consultants were completely absent. Today, the consulting business is very interested, and that's good, but at that time, completely absent. Academia, completely absent at that time. Now they are very interested. The biggest business school in Norway, their biggest research project right now is called Beyond Budgeting. So that's good, that's good. But at that time, grassroots rebellion from people like us. These 2 English guys described again what they saw through 12 principles and also came up with this name, Beyond Budgeting, right or wrong. And I'm going to share those 12 principles with you on the next slide. But many of you might not have seen those before. And even if I hope I've indicated that this is pretty big, but this slide will kind of confirm it. This is big stuff. So that's a little warning when I put up this slide, but don't worry, because first of all, you don't have to do everything at the same time. And even more important, this is not a recipe. This is not kind of tick the boxes, do this, do that, like a lot of management concepts actually are. This is more a philosophy, some guiding principles, some ideas about what it could look like. But it's not identical what has happened in these companies. It differs depending on what kind of business they are in, what kind of culture they have, what kind of history they have, and that's the way it should be. I don't like recipes, management recipes. I actually, because in a management recipe, somebody else have done all the thinking for you, right? Your only job is to implement other people's thinking. I find that quite boring and also quite dangerous. So if you like to think for yourself, there's a lot of good news in Beyond Budgeting implementation. The principles look like this, and you will recognize some of the things I've talked about already. And again, addressing both leadership and management processes. If we start on the left-hand side, again, being more values-based than rules-based. Defining performance in a different way. Transparency is important, autonomy is important, as some examples. On the right-hand side, again, careful with that fixed annual performance contract. Principle 8 has a view on rewards, which I will come back to in a minute. Principle 9 and 10 partly addresses the rhythm in the process. Make it more continuous, business-driven, event-driven, instead of these annual stunts. And think carefully through the balance between what happens top-down versus bottom-up, and don't forget that there is a third dimension, namely outside-in. Then it's first on principle 11 that beyond budgeting addresses cost and resources. And this is one of the big misunderstandings around beyond budgeting, because it's only one of 12 principles. And some people think that, well, beyond budgeting means no budget, I can spend whatever I want, and cost is not important. Big, big misunderstanding. It's actually the other way around. Of course, cost is important. Of course, we want an efficient use of resources. But then we need better ways of achieving that than what you do in a traditional annual detailed budget. Because then you sit in the autumn every year, and this game I know, because I've been heading up this for so many years. You sit in the autumn every year at corporate level, and you're handing out, if you're a reasonably big organization, millions of small bags to the organization of money. Right? Defining not just in total what is the optimal resource use in this organization next year, but also what is the optimal mix or split. So much for you, so much for you, so much on this and so much on that. How do we know that? Down to the last penny in the autumn the year before. If we at the same time agree that it's actually a bit uncertain what lies ahead of us in terms of threats and opportunities and what will happen. Right? So we are only trying to kind of take reality seriously and find better ways of making sure that we spend our money wisely. What you see here is a complete management model that has a view on most of the things you do in management, including, as an example, incentives. A lot of other management models out there are kind of addressing pieces of this. Very few are addressing the totality. But you need to address the totality in order to make sure that there are no gaps between what you say and what you do. And this is an attempt to close those gaps. And let me illustrate those gaps, what I mean with those gaps again, with a few examples of gaps that you very often find in companies. It doesn't help if we, on the left-hand side, on leadership, talk warm and sincere about how fantastic people we have on board, and we would be nothing without you, and we trust you so much, but not that much. Of course, we need to micromanage you through detailed travel budgets, because if not, you will run away and do a lot of, spend money like a travel like a drunken sailor, right? So one message on the leadership side, another message on the process side. Guess which one is strongest? Another example. It doesn't help if we on the value side talk, again, loud and warm and sincere about we and us and together and team. If everything we do on the reward side is based on individual bonuses, right? Then there's one message here and another message here. Again, which one is strongest? Those gaps are poison, we have to close them. And then that's why you need to think at the holistic, total management model, and not just at the pieces. Again, this is, for some people, quite big stuff. I have met CEOs who have understood this and wanted this from day one. But very often, at least from the beginning, this is a bit too big, and you risk to scare people, and if you scare people, you risk not getting started at all. And that's the worst thing that can happen, that you don't get started at all. In Statoil, when we started out in 2005, we were, of course, very familiar with these principles, but we were also a bit afraid of scaring people. So this slide, we kind of were a bit careful with using that back in 2005. Today, this slide will be a natural part of any leadership training we do, but not at that time. We started out with a slightly different problem, linked to this, but more specifically geared towards the budget, more logical, less threatening, a great place to start if this is too scary. We started with asking a very simple question that, towards the budget. That's a question we should ask much more against a lot of stuff, namely the question of why. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? That's the question we asked towards the budget. And when we asked that question, we realized that there are actually several purposes with a budget. And then I'm talking about that set of numbers that we call a budget that we make once a year. And I assume that most of the organizations that are represented here, you are making some kind of budget. So what would the purpose be of those budgets in your organizations? Any proposals? Has to be some good reason. Probably spending quite a lot of time on making this stuff. Why are your company making budgets? Cost control, absolutely. Cost control is one reason, and the way we use the budget to secure cost control is resource allocation, handing out these bags of money, and then we tell people that if you spend more, it has certain consequences, right? So cost control, resource allocation, absolutely one purpose. Are there other reasons why we make budgets? Prioritization, absolutely, but you could argue that that is kind of covered under resource allocation. If you don't get a bag of money, you are not very high up on the priority list, right? So I think we've covered it, but I agree. I'm after two slightly different purposes. Budgets, companies use budgets in order to set targets, right? Financial targets, sales targets, production targets. That's one purpose with a budget, to express some targets. And the third purpose of a budget is that especially finance people would use these budgets to understand what lies ahead in terms of financial capacity and cash flows and so on. So they want a kind of forecast of what lies ahead. So forecasting is the third purpose of a budget. So now we've got three purposes: target setting, forecasting, resource allocation. I said I wanted to talk about the problem, and there's no problem as such with each of those if they are made done in a sensible way. The problem comes when we combine these three purposes in one process that results in one set of numbers. Let me give you a few examples. Let's assume that understanding financial capacity is important. We need to understand what lies ahead in terms of revenues and costs. So we start on the revenue side. We ask our salespeople, what is your best sales forecast for next year? Not on the last penny, but your best sales forecast. But before these guys are able to answer, we add on that. Don't forget that the number you now give me, that will also become your sales target for next year. And maybe there's a sales bonus linked to hitting that sales target. So what's your sales forecast again? Could that sales forecast start to move when the sales guy realized that this is not just a forecasting process? Or could that forecast number start to move when he realizes this is not just a forecasting process? I'm actually negotiating my own salary here, right? We shouldn't be surprised if that sales forecast starts to move. I wouldn't blame the salesperson. I would blame our management model and our questions, which puts this guy in a difficult position. So maybe we thought that sales forecast was a bit low. We thought it should be a bit higher, but you know, it's budgeting time and the schedule is tight, and we need to move on, and we move to the cost side, and we ask the same people, other people, what is your best cost forecast for next year, or an investment forecast? But don't forget that the number you give me will also become your budget for next year, and if you spend more, it has certain consequences. So what was that cost forecast again? What? Could it start to move? Huh? Could it be this way? I mean, this is a game that goes on in organizations every year in the autumn when they make their budgets. And we might laugh about it, but it's actually quite a serious problem, because it's, and beyond being a non-value adding activity, it destroys the quality of our information. The solution to this problem is very simple, like most of the stuff in our management model. There's no rocket science. We still do these three things, but we do them in three separate processes, because these are different things. There can be different numbers. A target is what we want to happen. A forecast is what we think will happen, whether we like what we see or not. And resource allocation is about how can we manage our resources in the most optimal way. And the beauty of separating is that this opens up a big improvement agenda, because then we can start to have more intelligent discussions around each of these purposes, inspired by reality, the world out there, people in the organization. How can we, for instance, set targets that really motivates, inspires people, that stretches people without feeling stretched, but where we don't have the gaming and the lowballing and all the other stupid things kind of following it? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have targets like that? I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier than if you're trying to do it through a budget number. How can we have a very simple, lean forecasting process where we quickly get on the table a set of unbiased, unpolluted numbers, which are kind of good enough? And last but not least, how can we have a resource allocation process, which is an alternative to the budget? And this is actually headlines on how we do stuff in Statoil today. I'll come back to that later. And how can we do all of this on a more event-driven rhythm? More business-driven rhythm instead of making it into annual stunts. So this is where we started out. But in a way, having those discussions, you are coming into the beyond budgeting principles through the back door in a more innocent, less scary way. Because you have to think about, for instance, on resource allocation, right? Do we really need those detailed travel budgets that we've had all the time? As one example. So we started out here, then we also we were inspired by the 12 Beyond Budgeting Principles. We used this stuff to formulate our own 5 principles to describe how we wanted this to look at Statoil, and we also came up with Ambition to Action as the name of our new process. So now we are leaving, we've left the problems, we are leaving beyond budgeting theory, we are moving into Ambition to Action, the Statoil process. And I would like to share with you those 5 principles. And the first principle, we've touched upon some of this earlier, is about defining performance. Because at the end of the day, good performance is very much about how you are how you're performing compared to those that you naturally can't compare yourself with. It could be Statoil versus other oil and gas companies. It could be units. Our shared service center, how good are they compared to other shared service centers? Or it could be units internally in Statoil doing kind of basically the same type of business, where the purpose is mainly learning from each other, but where there is a kind of a small element of competing with each other in a friendly way. It's just like in football. No football team would say that our most important kind of ambitions for next year is to score 49 goals and get 52 points. And if that is achieved, it's celebration and champagne. They wouldn't think like that, right? Those are budget goals. They would think in terms of league tables, right? When ambitions are set, when they are evaluating performance along the way, and when it's time for celebration or the opposite at the end. Here is an example of how we do this. These are 2 KPIs, and I mean, shareholder return and return on capital are financial KPIs with their weaknesses. So that's not the point here. The point is that those are not absolute numbers. We have relative targets. These are a league table of 15 other oil and gas companies that we are competing with. And the target on the right-hand side is to be in the first quartile, and on the other one, to be above average. This is the closest our board comes to approve financial targets. But approve and approve, we've had the same targets now for many years, right? These are kind of evergreen targets that you have until you have something else. And by the way, these 2 metrics, the performance here is what drives the common bonus scheme that we have in Statoil. Everybody on board, in the same boat, us against the competition. We do also have some individual bonuses, quite modest compared to most of these other guys. I'll come back to how we handle those. Defining performance is very simple. The million-dollar question is still, how do you get the best possible performance? And we think one key question is autonomy, to create bigger room to move in for the organization so that they can respond fast and make the right decisions when stuff happens, without always having to run 9 floors up. But this is not an anarchy. Yes, the room to move in is much bigger, but there are still 4 solid walls in that bigger room to move. The first wall is the Statoil book, starting with our values. Then it talks about people and leadership, and then the book says a bit more about how we do stuff at Statoil, including what I'm talking about now. Second wall is Ambition to Action itself, which is also our version of the balanced scorecard, which some of you probably are familiar with. I'll come back to that. Third wall, a set of decision criteria, decision authorities. Those decision authorities are more kind of mandates. It has nothing to do with budgets, but it says something about how big individual decisions can you make before you need to go 1 level up. And those decision authorities need to be generous enough so that you don't always need to run upstairs. Last but not least, the final wall, sound business judgment. Never forget the power of sound business judgment in your management model. Then we are getting closer to these budgets, because then we say that within this framework, we call this the execution framework, then resources are in principle available for people to do their job. In principle. There might be KPIs on your ambition to action that regulates cost. in some form or shape, but hopefully in a more intelligent way than what you do in the annual detailed budget. There might be some kind of overall guiding to some teams. Operate within this activity level, roughly within this activity level, expressed in money until something else is decided. But there's not a million details within that overall guiding, right? So it's not a detailed budget. There might be no guiding at all, simply a unit cost target, right? You can spend more if you produce more, you can spend more if you sell more, and so on, vice versa. That might be a benchmark unit cost target. Your unit cost shall be below the average in Statoil, below the average in the business. Or there might be nothing at all. The corporate staff unit I'm based in, we don't have a cost budget, we don't have cost targets, but cost is still very important for us. We discuss cost all the time. We look at cost trends to make sure that those are kind of not moving in wrong directions. And if we shall make a big decision, we have a talk with our CFO. It might be a yes, it might be a no, depending on how things look right now. It was actually much easier in the earlier days when we got the detailed budget from the CFO, because then he had decided. And then we also had somebody to blame, right, when we had to make a bit unpopular decisions. Now the monkey is back on our shoulders, where it should be. And again, this is also just only a question of an issue of consistency, because our CFO says that, because the other stuff that we do where I'm based, my colleagues some of them are corporate controllers. They advise corporate management on million and billion dollar investments regularly. And our CFO is saying that, I mean, how can we trust you on those big advices if we can't trust you to manage your travel cost yourself, right? Just a question of consistency. This is also a social control mechanism, because we know that the trust we have been shown, we will only misuse that so many times before we don't have it anymore. Right? So it is a social control mechanism. When it comes to projects, we still have project budgets. So it is what we want to get rid of is the annual detailed budgets for investments, operations, and so on, but we still have project budgets. But the big difference is that you can get money for a project at any time. So what we don't have anymore is an annual investment budget where the board once a year kind of approve the investments for next year. You can come and ask for money for a project at any time. And a metaphor we often use here in the organization to explain what we mean. Because one problem with this Statoil money, and maybe some of the money in your companies as well, is that the numbers are so big. There are so many zeros in this number that it becomes a bit unreal. One way of making those zeros disappear is to think about our own private money and finances instead. And I would like you to do that for a minute. And maybe some of you have plans about doing something expensive in the near future. New car, or fix your kitchen, or a holiday, and maybe you need to borrow money in your private bank. And imagine that when you are coming home from this conference today, there is a letter in your mailbox from your bank. Very polite letter reading, "Dear customer, we have now changed the opening hours in the bank. So if you want to borrow money with us, we are now only open in October, and the rest of the year we are closed. Kind regards." And of course we laugh, because, I mean, and you know you don't need to worry. No bank would do such a stupid things. The banks have done some other stupid things, but they are not that this is not going to happen. Sorry. But back to business and budgets. That kind of letter I have been sending out year after year. The only difference in my letter, that was the start, because it didn't start with "dear customer," it started with "dear colleague." But the rest was quite identical, right? If you want to spend money on something next year, you better come and tell us now, because now it's budget time. And if it's something you have forgotten, or more like that, or it wasn't on the radar screen for any of us, well, that's too bad. But it's so much easier if it's on the budget versus not being on the budget, right? We want the bank to be open 12 months a year. But you can still get a no on your loan application, on your funding request. Cost is still important. We shall be just as good in saying no as yes. But when we say no, when we say yes, then we make decisions, right? And what do we need in order to make good decisions? What do we need in order to make good decisions? Information, right? And preferably good information. And here is another question for you. At which point in time do we have the best information? Not just about that project that we shall have a view on, yes or no, but also our capacity. Do we have the money? Do we have the people? Would that be in the autumn the year before? Or would it be as close as possible to project startup, given the lead times of that project? And that's a leading question, isn't it? I hope we agree that it is actually as late as possible. So one way to explain what we are trying to achieve here, we are trying to make decisions first at the right level in the organization, which means not everything at the top, at the right time, which means very often as late as possible, and last but not least, with the right mindset. And the right mindset means asking different questions when you should make a decision than the classical budget question. Do I have a budget for this? If I have, it's okay. If I don't have, it's not okay. We want other questions to be asked. We want those questions to be, is this really necessary? What is good enough? How is this creating value? Is this within my execution framework? Do we have the capacity as things look right now? Right? Different questions to make sure that we make good decisions. We call this dynamic resource allocation. This is one of the parts of the model that our managers still struggle with because the old thing was so much easier, especially if you're a manager that don't like to make decisions. Then a detailed budget is wonderful. The more detailed it is, the fewer decisions you have to make because somebody else made them for you. Fortunately, we don't have many of those in Statoil, but we have a few. Okay. Business follow-up. We still have business... Oh, no. Our CFO. First. This is a message about... We think that it might still be turbulent what lies ahead of us in the world economy. We are trying to prepare also on the cost side, but we don't want to prepare in the traditional way of traditional cost cutting, 10% across the board. You know, that way of cutting cost is just as effective as moving your lawn. It looks very nice in the beginning, but the grass keeps growing back, and you need to move the lawn again and again. Just like companies have to do cost-cutting exercises over and over again because they never address the underlying reasons. And this is an attempt. What we are trying to do is to address the underlying reasons, work even harder to create an even stronger cost-conscious culture in the organization. And these are some of the words from our CFO around that. And note that he is talking about good cost and bad cost. It's not the good cost we want to get rid of. As long as we have the capacity, we want more good cost because they create value. It's the bad cost we want to get rid of. So what is good cost and bad cost? Well, that's difficult. It can be difficult to distinguish, but normally, as Torgrim is saying here, normally people out there know that better than the CFO. Business follow-up. We still have a business follow-up. What we don't have anymore is the traditional budget follow-up, which is about looking at actual year-to-date versus budget year-to-date and then spending a lot of time explaining the variances. Used to be one of my core competencies. I was very good at explaining budget variances. The problem with doing that is that you are looking backwards. And if this is backwards, then this is forwards. And this is where we want to go. So what we do in our business review meetings is, because we separate between target and forecast, then the key question is, how does it look out there? Forecast versus target. If it looks okay, what kind of risks can jeopardize what looks okay? If it doesn't look okay, what do we need to do to get back on track? Right, straight into that forward-looking, action-oriented, constructive discussion instead of kind of the explain and blame-oriented looking backwards. So that was business follow-up. And last but not least, it is not just a question of what we deliver our business results. It's also a question of how. And how is defined by the values in this book and behaviors. And this decision to focus both on the what and the how, that came from our CEO himself. And in order to make sure that everybody understood that he was serious about this, he put the weighting between the two, the what and the how. In all consequences for your pay, for your career, he put that weighting to 50-50. Now, you might say that that was a brave decision. And in a way, yes, because not some other companies have done it, but not too many. But it was also the only decision he could make. Because how can we claim to be a values-based company, which we do, if everything around values is completely absent in target setting and performance evaluation and consequences? So without that concept, that would have been a big, big gap between what we say and what we do. Those are the 5 principles. Then I want to spend, we're getting towards the end here, I want to spend the rest of the time being a bit even more concrete around this ambition to action scorecard thing, which I've mentioned a few times. But before that, a quote from our CEO on ambition to action. His name is Helge Lund, and he's actually talking about the same things that I started out with, that there is a dynamic world out there, and you need to reflect on your view on people. So take a look at that before we move on. Those are, I would argue, wise words from a wise man, and I'm obviously a big supporter of everything we are doing. So, ambition to action, our version of the balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard has traditionally the purpose of translating strategies into something more concrete so that you can implement your strategies. And we have that as a purpose as well on top here. But we have two additional purposes. Secure flexibility, a bigger room to move in, and activate our values and people and leadership principles, instead of letting this be empty words in a book. Then there are some steps in this process which might be familiar. I mean, you might have something similar in your organization. Strategy here is on the left-hand side. We haven't done big changes on the strategy process. That was not our main challenge. By the way, strategy is about making choices. So if you never say no, you don't have a strategy. So next time somebody is presenting a nice, flashy strategy to you, ask what they have said no to. If they can't answer, they have no strategy, even if the slides might be very fancy. But it's not enough to say no. You also need to be able to implement what you have said yes to. This is where ambition to action is coming in, by translating that strategy into more concrete strategic objectives. What does success look like on a medium-term time horizon? More on words than on numbers and medium-term time horizon. Then we are trying to measure that we are moving towards that strategy through key performance indicators. The only problem with measurement is that measurement alone moves nothing. Nothing happens just because we measure. You don't lose weight simply by weighing yourself. I have tried a few times, but unfortunately it doesn't work. So we all know that nothing happens before you do something. That is why there's a high focus on actions and trying to understand the consequences of actions through forecasts. And last but not least, a translation of all of this into individual or team goals. What does this mean for you and me? So what you see here is and here you also recognize delivery and behavior. What you see here is an integrated process that runs all the way from strategy through, call it finance territory, into HR. We have worked very closely, the three functions together, to make this hang together. Because it must hang together. So that's in a way good news. But there is some bad news as well here. Because part of this process, especially the first beginning here, that's not a Statoil invention. That's based, as I said, on the balanced scorecard concept. Right? It came from the US in the early 90s, and that's not necessarily bad news. But the bad news for us is that all our competitors, they also use balanced scorecards in some form or shape. So if we should get competitive advantage out of this, we have to do this in a different and better way than our competitors. And I would like to share with you a few areas where we try to be different. The big difference is that we combine beyond budgeting and the balanced scorecard. Then it becomes something quite different. Very often, unfortunately, balanced scorecards are used to reinforce traditional management. If you like traditional management, a balanced scorecard is fantastic compared to if you only have a financial budget to kind of cascade and micromanage through. So that's the big difference. But a few more specific differences. One difference has to do with KPIs. With most of our competitors, then their scorecard is actually only about KPIs. Well, that's basically what you see. It used to be like that in Statoil as well, but that is a problem because of this letter in KPI, which stands for Key Performance Indicators. Right? These are indicators, trying to indicate that we are moving in that direction. I've been working with balanced scorecards for almost 20 years now, and when this stuff came to Europe, I was so fascinated with this new concept, and especially these KPIs that would come and tell us everything that we hadn't understood about our business, right? That would kind of make the fog disappear and we would understand everything. We had big expectations to what these KPIs could do for us. Reality wasn't up here, by the way. Reality was down here. It was actually quite difficult to find these fantastic KPIs. But I'm quite a stubborn person, and my hunt for the perfect KPI continued for many, many years afterwards. But now I've given up. I have given up simply because the perfect KPI does not exist. If you still are looking for that one, forget it. But don't misunderstand me, there are good KPIs, and there can be a combination of KPIs that can make this even better, but the perfect KPI, forget it. The KPIs actually need help in the job they often get, of being a place where we express targets, and then we shall measure that we are moving towards these targets. There has to be room for something more than that narrow measurement. There has to be something on the left-hand side and the right-hand side to create a richer and broader performance language for what we are trying to achieve. And we also need to give these KPIs help in this holistic performance evaluation, where we take off the measurement glasses and look at what measurement is not able to pick up. Right? Headwind, tailwind, changes in assumptions, other stuff. Albert Einstein, he once said, "Not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted counts." Don't misunderstand me. Again, measurement is still an important part of the model, but there has to be room for more. So that's one difference. I've got a few more differences, but first I wanted to share with you an example of such an ambition to action. This is actually a screenshot from the system itself. What you see here is a recent version of the Statoil corporate ambition to action. Forget the content here. On the corporate level, this becomes quite boring. It's much more exciting when you get further out. But you recognize the elements that I talked about on the previous slide as basis for the HR process then further on the right here. Another little difference between us and other companies, if you have balanced scorecards in your organizations, then the order might be different. Right? Very often you have kind of finance on top, and then you have people in an organization at the bottom. Used to be like that in Statoil as well. But we saw what happened when we had business review meetings, and when the agenda was a bit tight, which is often the case, right? Starting on the top with finance and kind of working your way downwards, and then when you started to approach people in an organization, then people started to look at the watches, and guys, we're a bit short of time. Could we maybe delay this to the next meeting? Okay. Delay to next meeting. Next meeting is coming, starting on the top, moving downwards. Guys, we are a bit short of time, and could we maybe... You might say it's not a big thing as such, but I mean, think about the symbolic effect of this. How come that we on one hand claim that people in an organization is important, and then there's no time to talk about it? So we simply switched the orders. Now, when we now have business review meetings, and those business review meetings are always done around ambition to action, we start up on people at the organization. And trust me, there's always time to talk about the money. So today we have around 1,400 of these in the organization. The one on top, again, the Statoil one, that's what our board approve. Again, these two KPIs here within finance are the same as I showed a bit earlier, the two league table KPIs, where the target is to be above average in the first quartile. Around 1,400. Let me use this slide to illustrate a few other areas where we try to be different. The first had to do with how do we create a kind of a strategic alignment through these. A lot of people, they ask, shall we have an ambition to action out in our team here? What's the corporate instruction? That doesn't exist, in the sense that this is not mandatory. Teams choose for themselves if they want to use one. And if they ask us, we would say that we would definitely recommend this. But your motivation for using an ambition to action in your team, that should be that this is something that you and your team perceive as a meaningful, value-adding, sensible thing in order to help you to manage yourself. That should be the main motivation. Because if the main motivation is that the only reason why you have one here is that somebody up there told you that you should have one so that they can sit up there and cascade and instruct down to you, and you shall report back up to them. Then this becomes just another part of the big control system. And in our culture, if your own ambition to action only becomes a landing ground for instruction from above, that kills the ownership, it kills the commitment. And without ownership and commitment, this becomes singing and dancing. It's a nice facade. I can stand here in Reykjavik and say we have 1,400 ambition to actions. But if these are kind of not living and owned, they are worth nothing. So, but still, this can't be an anarchy. There still has to be a reasonably read strategic thread through here. The way we create that is not in the traditional way, which is cascading. Have you heard that expression before? Cascading. It's a very popular expression on corporate level in companies. I'm not sure it sounds equally good out here. When corporate says that they're going to cascade, sounds like you're going to get a bucket or something in your head. Or the word rollout, have you heard that before? Maybe it sounds more like rollover when you're out here. We have never used the word rollout in our implementation. What we do instead of cascading, is what we call translating. And this is more than playing with words. Cascading is this level instructing this level. Translation is about switching the roles, and this level shall translate other relevant ambition to actions. If you're sitting here, you and your team is here, then you need to look at how does our ambition to action need to look like in order to reflect the ambition to the ambition level, the direction of other relevant ambition to actions, typically the one above. Maybe you want to look further up, maybe a bit left and right if you have relations to other units. And that translation should take hours and hours in management teams to create the common understanding, the ownership, the commitment, and all the good things we want. If such a translation should go wrong, point in this direction instead of this direction, of course the level above should intervene and do what they are paid for. But trust me, it's not a problem. That doesn't mean that we never cascade or instruct from above. There are situations when it is the right thing to do and necessary, but it should be much more exception than the rule. Then it's also more accepted when it happens. In order to translate, you need transparency. How can you translate if everything is secret? So all of these 1,400 are open and accessible for all employees. With a few exceptions of share sensitive information, everything is open. And we want that openness to be used not in the way that most ERP systems kind of market their functionality, because they all the time talk about drill down, drill down. You can drill down. You can sit at the corporate head office and drill down to the sales office in Italy and find out how many blue pens they used last month. Why on earth should you do that from corporate level? So we want, in a way, less drill down as such. We want more drill across. What are those other guys doing? Or drill up. What was that strategy again? So I look forward to the day when SAP and the others are not just talking about drill down. Again, it's the control mentality. Another area, the last area where we're trying to be different, and I'm getting towards the end here, has to do with the calendar. We used to have annual versions of Ambition to Action. There used to be a set for 2008, there used to be a set for 2009. We made a new one every autumn. Not anymore. Now we have no annual versions, and any team can change whatever they want on their own ambition to action when there is a need for it, when stuff happens in their own business reality. You can change your strategic objectives if strategy change. You can change your KPIs if objectives change, or if you simply find a better KPI, that happens. You can even change your KPI targets if these targets have lost their meaning. And lost their meaning can either mean completely impossible to achieve, right? They're so ambitious that everybody laughs about them. Those targets doesn't work. They don't motivate, they don't inspire, they don't work. Or it could be the opposite. This target is a piece of cake, right? No ambition at all. The only control mechanism we have put around this is to say that if you want to change something that is big, so if you're sitting here and want to change something that's big, you still need to seek approval one level up, but you can do that at any time. If you want to change something that is small, you simply inform to the same level. Big or small, always inform left and right if people are affected by your changes. This is the coordination part of it. Why should all coordination be a kind of a corporate responsibility? And then when we introduced this, some people said, well, that's fine, but what is big and what is small? And they were looking for guidance, kind of this number from corporate definition of what is big and what is small, which is impossible for us to make, right? So the definition we gave back was whatever is big in your reality is big. And so this is something people sort out for themselves, and if somebody over here ends up with a definition of big and small, which is different from somebody over here, that's okay, as long as it works both places. We want to make this as self-regulating as possible, to make things, teams sort this out themselves, instead of us doing it all on corporate level. Last thing on calendar years and frequency time horizon, targets and forecasts. We want natural time horizons on targets. Why should all targets have a deadline of end of December? Is that just because of the link to pay? And if so, is that a good enough reason? We don't think so. So targets, I mean, if you have urgency and you can deliver in 4 months, put 4 months. If this is more complex, you need 18 months, put 18 months. If it's very long, have some intermediate milestones. That does not prevent you from still that you can sit down once a year and kind of evaluate performance because it shall have pay consequences. But then you are looking back at an ambition to action. Some might have been very dynamic, living a lot, others not that much. Some targets was maybe completed 3 months ago, others are still work in progress. Maybe something was finished end of December. I mean, we haven't forbidden the calendar year. We are not fundamentalists. So you can still set end of December targets if you want. Forecasts, many companies doing beyond budgeting have implemented rolling forecasting. Rolling forecasting is about updating your forecast every quarter, looking 5 quarters ahead. Much better than traditional forecasting against the wall of December, where you get less and less interested in the near future the closer you get to December. Right? Your forecasting horizon becomes shorter and shorter. We were about to do that at Statoil, but then it struck us that rolling forecasting is, in a way, just another version of something fixed when it comes to frequency and time horizon. And I've been working different places in Statoil. Some years I worked as the finance manager in our trading unit, where we trade and sell the crude oil that we produce. And for these traders, anything beyond 3 weeks is quite foggy. Right? But I also worked in the part of Statoil where we build the things we need to build in order to produce the oil and gas we find. Platforms, pipelines. And for those guys, 3 years is actually quite short. Why should we force everybody into the same forecasting rhythm, forecasting time horizon? So what we have introduced instead is what we call dynamic forecasting. So we have these teams update their forecast when stuff happens in their own business reality, when it happens, and as far ahead as relevant for their own business. If somebody further up needs longer time horizons, they kind of add on generic data to fill that gap instead of forcing everybody to do it from bottom up. The interesting thing with trying to escape the calendar year is that it reminds me about this animal that was tied to a pole with this 5-meter chain. Could only walk in the circle. And one day somebody were cutting that chain. And some animals, when that happens, they immediately take off and enjoy the new freedom. Other animals, they kind of continue to walk a bit like this, but then they take a kind of probing step outside to see, can this really be real? Do we have this freedom to kind of do it outside the circle? And some animals, they simply continue to walk in that circle, even if the chain has been cut. And it's a little bit the same here. We still see, I mean, the calendar mindset sitting very firmly in people's heads. So it takes time for people to kind of test out and explore and understand that this is actually for real. We can't force people to do that. I mean, we have simply created conditions for people to do things in a more kind of business-tailored way. Last but not least here, I talked a few times about this holistic performance evaluation. And holistic here means 2 things. First of all, not just looking at what, but also at the how, the 2 counting 50-50. But holistic also means within what, or we call it delivery, not just blindly looking at the KPIs, reading red, green, and then concluding. You know, if performance evaluation is only about reading the color of KPIs and then conclude, then the only qualification you need as a leader in order to do that job is that you are not colorblind. And I think we should have somewhat higher expectations to our managers than that you are not colorblind. So what we do is, yes, we do measure, but before we conclude, we take off the measurement glasses. Yes, I see that your KPI is green, but have you really moved towards those strategic objectives? Looking at things that measurement maybe not picks up. How ambitious are those KPI targets? This is an important question for situations where, let's assume you have 2 teams doing more or less identical work. One team really stretched themselves. Maybe they were inspired by thinking outside in, what others were able to achieve, and set the target here, performance here, they didn't completely make it. Right? What would the color of that KPI be? If high is good, this is the target, this is the performance. Red, probably red, maybe yellow, but certainly not green. And you have the other team doing more or less the same work, but more kind of cynical, better at the target negotiations. We're able to kind of negotiate the target down here, performance here. What would the color of the KPI be? If high is good. above target green, right? Which of these teams performed best? Well, this team did. And very often afterwards, it becomes visible who were stretching and who were not. And we need to give people credit for stretching, even if they didn't completely make it. Without this question, why should anybody stretch? Finance and HR can talk till the cows are coming home in the morning about the need for setting ambitious targets. But if you're a rational manager, it's the most stupid thing you are doing. That just reduces the chances of hitting the target and getting the nice consequences of hitting the target, right? So this is about creating kind of fairness into the process. Also, has there been changes in assumptions? Tailwind, headwind? Was there an earthquake in Japan that made things a bit more difficult? Was there a competitor going bankrupt, making that performance a piece of cake, right? We shouldn't take everything into account, but those questions must be asked. And it's only when these questions are asked that we can have a view on what kind of performance we are looking at. And that performance is the basis for development plans for all employees, and also for rewards. For the big majority, that would be their fixed salary adjustment. For those on individual bonus, that will also go through the same evaluation. So that's also a reward consequence. But this is one way of taking the bite out of some of the problems with individual bonuses, not all, but some, because it's very dangerous to go straight from measurement into bonus consequences. Very dangerous. You have to pressure test using common sense before you conclude. Okay, going back to where we started and the metaphor of traffic, everything I've talked about has been about trying to move our process towards a more self-regulating mode. Less of the 10%, more building on the culture, more event-driven, less calendar, and letting teams sort this out themselves, more translation and less cascading. More of these relative KPIs, comparing yourself with others compared to the absolute KPIs. That is actually self-regulating, because if you use these relative KPIs, league table targets, if conditions change, right? They normally do that for all the players in that league table, if market conditions change or so on. So those kind of relative league tables are more robust against a lot of changes that absolute targets struggle with. And last but not least, more transparency and less secrecy. This is about trying to simplify, but as I said, simple is not the same as easy. So, that is what I wanted to share with you. I think we have time for a few questions, if there is time. If any questions should pop up later, feel free to contact me on these coordinates, or during lunch, or tonight, whatever. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's highly appreciated. I'm trying to share some nuggets from time to time on this stuff. And if you're even more interested, there's something called the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, which is a network, actually a global network of companies interested in this stuff. I'm heading up the European one. We normally meet every 6 months, typically in London, but we've been in Oslo, Copenhagen lately because of a big interest in the Nordic countries. So check out the website if you are more interested. And if you're even more interested, then what you just have heard was actually the short version of the Statoil story. You might have felt it as a long session, given that this is almost 90 minutes, but it was actually the short version. There is a long version, and that long version is found in this book, which I wrote about the Statoil case, but also about another company where I worked for some years, called Borealis, where we kicked out the budget actually in 1995. And here is more about the problems with traditional management. And the chapter I enjoyed writing the most in that part of the book is called The Bonus Problem. And more about implementation advices, which I haven't had time to talk about here. I've been trying to write the book that I wanted to read myself, so this is not a very academic book. This is a story from the trenches of real life. Thank you very much.